It's thinking. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ore-atory. This month, I have my friend, the lovely Julie Lucas, who is the executive director of MiningMinnesota, with us, and we are going to talk about a whole lot of stuff, but ultimately, the goal is to weave in some concepts about sustainability, advocacy, and community in our chat today. So, Julie, as I said, is the executive director of MiningMinnesota, and truly one of the people that I look up to as an advocate for responsible mineral production, and has years and years of experience in the environmental management side and community leadership. And so she's really, a person that I look to figure out how to have these conversations articulately and with people who perhaps aren't always on our side. So I am really pleased to welcome her to chat today. So thank you, Julie, for being here.
Thank you, Lindsey. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I generally tend to lead these things off with like the big question. What's getting you excited about your work recently?
Jump right into it.
Jump right into it.
Right into it. What I'm excited about is the opportunity to have the conversation, and this role is kind of a dream job for me. It's representing my home area, where I live, where my husband and I, have established, this is home, and I get to support, the future workforce, because our organization supports future projects. So we are able to advocate for the future of the Iron Range, and while respecting and supporting the current Iron Range mining, which is iron mining, which might be obvious from the name. But we get to support the future projects and the sustainability of this region, the success of this region, prosperity of this region, and just that growth, and just that's what I'm really excited about.
I love that, and I think that there is so much to be excited about. I think that you guys are in a really interesting spot in the world of mining, and I want to talk a little bit more about it because I feel like I'm here in the southwestern US and focus so much on what's going around here that it took me a minute to kind of appreciate and understand that you've got this massive historical mining area and that really there's a bright future ahead of it, and I think you're helping pave the way for that. But give me some more information. I mean, how many companies are there operating in Minnesota, and like what other details can you share with me about that?
Yeah, so Minnesota, we are kind of forgotten. There's always a joke, we're a flyover state, and we shouldn't be. We have a long history of mining. So, our organization doesn't support the iron mining industry. We have an iron mining association, but we've been iron mining since 1880. And we're actually the 5th largest mining state in the country, which, like I said, people just don't realize, because we don't tell our stories as often as we should. And my colleague that runs the Iron Mining Association, she's really focused on telling that story now. And then so for our projects, I joke that we're trying to fill in the rest of the periodic table, starting with helium and possibly hydrogen. I don't have a hydrogen member yet, but
Okay.
I say yet.
Well, maybe after today.
Yeah, maybe after today, because people are looking at it. So, we have pulsar helium. So we have a helium deposit here, not connected to oil and gas. It is just a naturally occurring helium deposit. And so we're looking at the future of that, which is still hard for me to wrap my head around. But, we have copper nickel has been our primary focus as an organization, because we have New Range Copper Nickel, we have Twin Metals Minnesota, we have Talon Metals. And then we also have a new member that is North Star Manganese. And we have exploration members who are looking at titanium and vanadium.
Wow.
And they're also still looking at copper nickel. So we're trying to fill in as much of that periodic table as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And, all of those projects are in different phases of development. Some have gone through permitting and are just still working on remaining permits. Others are still in exploration phase. Others are going through environmental review. So it's a little bit of everything. And there's just a lot of activity and a lot of people focused on Minnesota right now, which is kind of awesome.
It's really exciting. I mean, I think that, like you said, there's this perception that it's this flyover state, but there's been such a history of it, and there's even more to come. And I think securing domestic supply is obviously really important for us at this juncture. And so it's nice to hear that there's as much activity. I guess, what's the general sentiment? Are people pro mining? Are people receptive to it? How's it looking?
Really depends where you are in the state. One of the things that we've really had to evaluate is, what is community? Who is your community? A lot of our projects, when we think of where our projects are located, the locals, particularly for the Iron Range projects, we're supportive. Yeah. We are, either have worked in mines ourselves, we're married to miners, our grandfathers were miners, we've had some connection to mining. And so folks that have lived here or who live here currently, we see that it can be done well. We see how the industry has evolved over time, and we see the benefits it brings to the community.
Sure.
What has been really interesting as these projects have been going through permitting and development over all these years is we live in and everybody says this, we live in a really beautiful area, but this is kind of tourism area. That's another one of our big things. And what we've seen is that who feels that this is their community is a lot broader than the folks who actually live here.
Okay.
And those folks from outside the area are really afraid of these projects, and they have a lot of concerns. So we've really had to reset who is our community. It's not the people who live here. I mean, it is too, obviously.
But going beyond that, right?
It's just a lot broader. I mean, we get public comments coming in from New York City.
Wow.
And they're not supportive, typically. Sure. So that's been fascinating to see as somebody who's here, as a local.
I'm glad that you brought up community. It's part of what we're supposed to talk about today. But I agree, and I think not just in Minnesota, but everywhere, right? I think that this is becoming a more pressing issue. One, to attract the talent that we need to our industry. Two, to attract the investment that we need to support our industry. And three, to get the support and general advocacy that mining isn't always that like 4-letter word in terms of being dirty or awful, or just looking at it as extractive, right? And I saw a hashtag the other day that a friend shared, and it said, "Before it was yours, it was mined."
I saw that one too.
I love that. So I think I saw that on a Kelly Ward post, and I don't know if she came up with that. I'm sure that it's been out there, but there's all kinds of things that we share about that. And it made me think, and it was so relevant, right? Because we want to detach ourselves from the end result of what we're doing in the mining industry. And perhaps it's not even a conscious detachment, but I think you posted something recently on LinkedIn, and I fangirl often, so I read most of the posts that you put out there. But you had a really nice way of saying, like, hey, we can't remove ourselves from the end part. We need to be talking about the entire process. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's a sad disconnect that we have as a society on stuff. And one of the things that I've really been excited about this job is the opportunity to work with folks in Minnesota that are in the clean energy space. Whether it's MinSea, which is a solar organization, or Clean Energy Economy Minnesota, they've both been willing to have really great conversations with us, because they recognize that we don't build this technology without mining. And if you want to feel really good about the technology that's built, you need to feel good about the mining that brought you those minerals. And it is just kind of seeing that whole supply chain and understanding every step along the way, how things come to your house, how things come to your office, where things come from. Yeah. I truly believe you will treat the things you own with more respect if you take the time to realize how they came into being and recognize that mining was that first step. We have nothing without mining.
Yeah.
And so it's not a conversation of if we should mine, it's when, where, how, by whom.
Yeah.
And I want to have those conversations. Let's stop pretending we aren't using these products, because we all are. We all turn on light switches.
Right? We need food. We need infrastructure. We need that, right. Our cell phones, our cars, all the things. And it's interesting because I've had this conversation for so long, right? I sort of accidentally came into mining. And so many of the people that I went to school with or that are friends, they say, "Oh, what do you do in mining? Like what does that possibly look like?" And, as I approached almost 20 years of doing it, they're fairly used to me being on my soapbox and telling them all the things that we do. So they've all been educated, but it's really interesting because there is just such a detachment. It's not like you go to you recognize that bacon comes from a pig, right? Like they're like, what? Where did these things come from? We must just artificially come up with them in the universe. And so having those early stage conversations to educate individuals where things are coming from are so critical. And again, I think you do it in such a disarming way, and you really do a great job of meeting people where they're at and providing them with that information without judgment, without being rude or crass or anything else. And I think that that's a superpower, because so many of us get defensive about what we do. How could you possibly not know about this? It's so important. You use all the things, but I've really never seen you do that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of I really do try to meet people where they're at. And it sounds like such a cliche term, but it's really true. And it's not like I don't feel a lot of those feelings and frustration. And I grew up on a small family farm, and my dad owned a meat processing plant. We'd have protesters, and learning about where your food comes from, that was part of my early life. But mining, I didn't know anything about until I moved to the Iron Range, where you can't, to go anywhere, I drive past open pits. I see open pits. It's not tucked away, a little plant in the woods. They're there on the highway, 4-lane highway, and there's a mine right there. But I try to remind myself now, because I've lived up here 22 years, this has become my daily. This is what I see. This is what I know. For the vast majority of humans, they don't drive past an 8-mile long pit on their way to Super One, which is our grocery store up here, but they don't drive past that. And so I try to just have that recognition that if I didn't live up here, I would be the same way, because I was the same way before I lived up here.
Yeah.
And it's trying to understand that people, why would they know? And until we get better at getting out of our area and telling that story, this is on us. This is our story. We should be the one to tell it. And I think the other thing is that sometimes we forget is we have opposition who is paid opposition. That is what they do for a living.
Right.
Those are those folks. There's this whole chunk of humans who are just scared and concerned. And we got to just see them as, they're not opponents. They're not enemies. They are just people who are scared that we are going to damage an area that is incredible. Like, I live in the boreal forest of northeastern Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes, but there's actually over 12,000. These folks, they have worries about the same things we do, right? It's not that we're not worried about water. It's not that we're not worried about the land, the wetlands, the air, the wildlife. Miners are just as concerned. It's just that we see solutions.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is meet people and say, we are also concerned. However, we know what the solutions to protecting those things. And so we have to just kind of realize those people have a lot in common with us. They also love what Minnesota has to offer for natural resources. So let's start there and start talking about how we protect the environment, because we do. And because mining is a hole in the ground, whether it's above ground or it's underground, it still is an impact to the earth, because you're using the earth to create. So let's talk about what we actually tangibly do to protect the earth as we are utilizing it.
Well, and I think that that's a really important thing, and I respect that view so much because you're coming at it from an environmental background, and now you get to lead this group that gets to go out and influence and impact and educate and advocate and do all these wonderful things for our industry. But I think that you're probably uniquely qualified to do that because you sort of were like, hey, this isn't where I meant to start.
No way, not even close.
That's exactly right. And so, balancing that environmental side with what the rest of this looks like, you do a great job. And there are so many out there that probably respect that standpoint because you had to arrive to the end part where you're supporting mining and advocating for it. And so I would imagine maybe that alone is a disarming factor for many that you get to talk to and saying, hey, I understand this from a very, very different perspective. I am not somebody that comes from a mining engineering background that went out and said, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I came from an environmental background.
Yeah.
And share your concerns. And so I really respect that. And interestingly, so we have a comment. I'm always terrible about getting to these, but Dr. Hayden Mart, who has also been a guest on the show, he said, I'm just going to summarize that the word mining can be viewed really as toxic, and perhaps we need to drop the word entirely. That there's other ways to communicate without, using that. And then he has another comment, there are other ways to communicate without coming across as vested interests, right? And I think he's right on the mark. And as we talk about learning how to communicate about our industry, I don't always have a better word than mining other than critical resources. And I've been starting to use that because I think that, if you look at it as a resource like water, like solar, like other things, right? This is an ingredient to, like you said, the rest of our world that's so important to us. So maybe, rebranding that title is part of what we have to do.
In our name, right? Mining Minnesota, and Talia, my amazing coworker, and I have talked a lot about rebranding, and it's not just rebranding Mining Minnesota, it's rebranding mining. And we kind of joke now with helium. We're like, are we really mining helium? So we're like, well, but Minnesota Mineral Resource Production is a very clunky name. But it is true. And I catch myself a lot of times when I go off the range and people say, oh, what do you do? Like, I'm nervous to say, well, I work in mining. And I used to be really uncomfortable with it. Now I'm like, I work in mining. I run a mining trade association. Woohoo! We have because I want people to hear about it, but it is hard. He's completely right. People hear the word mining, they think huge gaping hole in the earth, and even when you go to like an AI kind of thing to have images drawn, it's so hard. That legacy haunts us so much. And I don't, that is one of our greatest challenges is how do we recognize what happened in the past and what those concerns are that we're going to continue to be this way? How do we move to the future? Because the demand isn't in the past. I chat with, like I said, Kristen that runs the IMA, the Iron Mining Association, not to be confused with our friends over at Idaho Mining Association.
Right, too many acronyms.
We talk a lot about, we go down to our main metro area is Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities. And there will be people who say, you're still mining up there? We're like, we have 4,000 miners. Yeah. Like, we're a $4 billion iron mining industry. Yeah, we're still mining up here. And so just, so part of me wants to keep that word mining just because it does cause a little bit of twitchy and it hopefully spurs conversation, but that legacy is tough. And, but then I think about medicine. We don't judge, when I got cancer, it's not like I went to the doctor and asked if they were going to do some crazy, like, weird treatment from the old days, right? I trusted that the new treatments were the right treatments. And 20 years from now, the treatment is going to be completely different. And we just accept that, but we don't say, you know what, you're right. I have cancer. I don't know if I trust today's treatment. I'd like to wait 20 years to see where treatments are at before you save my life. Okay, because I and I don't want to say the leeches because I know they're still using leeches for some stuff.
Yeah.
It's actually legit. But when you look at old cancer treatments, they're crazy. And I don't, but I didn't ask my oncologist if they were going to do that. And
Yeah.
I didn't say, no, don't give me treatments because of what you did 20, 30 years ago. I
Yeah.
focused on surviving today. And that's where mining, we need to build that trust, and we need to help people see that this needs to be done because we want to survive today. We want a world that uses these metals because this is what keeps our world running. So it's
Well,
a
and
tough one.
I think that that's a really interesting correlation, right? Because we don't ask questions so often of how we got from point A, whether it be medicine or mining or whatever, from where we started to where we're at, right? Things evolve. We evolve, we learn more, we do better. And ultimately that I think should be some of the messaging of
Yeah.
what we're doing. And so whether we drop mining or whether we use it to spark interest or conversation or controversy or whatever to have that conversation is a starting point. And I think that it's really, really becoming more and more important that we press that forward, right? But just like you said, people don't know about Minnesota because you're not talking about what you're doing, and we're not out there front and center. I'm all of a sudden a Minnesotan.
You
But
should work on that accent. So
I know.
don't make me break out the accent.
Oh, come on. I love the accents. And, but yeah, I think that without having this broader conversation and sometimes being a little controversial about it and getting out there front and center, talking about our wins, talking about how we do it differently, talking about how we do it better, talking about how it impacts some of the things that the other individuals want, whether it's a cell phone or a Tesla or whatever it might be. But I think that the tie to electrification and net zero and all of the things that those individuals want and say, hey, in fact, this relies upon so much of what we do in the mining industry. And, getting them also in sustainable industry or whatever we want to call it, to come back to us and say, hey, we're related. We're working together.
Absolutely.
That I think is really important. And I don't know how to get everybody to do it, but I think it's Rio Tinto who put out with another group, and I'm gonna forget who it is, but they have the labels, and it's like a nutrition label, but it's like where everything came from, and so it's like super transparent. No one gives a hoot if they're not in mining, honestly. But
we should, right?
Maybe it's some awareness for that.
We are all in mining.
That's exactly, well, whether you recognize it or not, you need it.
If you buy anything, if you turn on your lights, if you heat your home, if you drive a car, if you ride a bus, if you ride a train or a plane if you just wake up today, something in your life came from mining. We are all mining.
Yeah.
And, I gave a talk a couple months ago or I guess it was a month ago, and I kind of threw off the audience, and I didn't mean to, but I said, you are the problem. And then I just paused. I had to pause because I wanted to sneeze, but the pause came across as if, and I was like, you're the problem.
Yeah.
And I said, because you're a consumer. Mining exists because of consumers.
Yep.
And what's cool when you're the problem is that means you can also be part of the solution. And being part of the solution means facing your consumerism and asking, where did this come from? Like, I think one of the coolest things about living on the Iron Range is that 85% of the US domestic steel starts here.
That's really cool.
So if you drive a car that was made in the US with American steel, if you buy an appliance made with American steel, guess what? It came from Minnesota. And we watched it roll out on train cars as little taconite pellets. And I know the people that did the work, right? And there's just something so cool about being a consumer and being like, somebody I know designed the blasting pattern to get that rock blasted. Someone I know ran the control room in the concentrator. Someone I know ran the control room in the pellet plant. Someone worked pellet loadout. Someone and to see like a final product and know that real people, that your kids go to school with, that like their parents go to, you know what I'm saying? Like there's just this really cool community thing. And that's where I don't know that people outside of mining understand how satisfying it is to know that your work grows up to become something.
Yeah.
And I saw some opponents the other day on TikTok, which was a terrible idea for me to be on TikTok. However, and they were making fun of how we're always like, but what about the cell phones? Yeah, there's no lie in that.
Yeah.
Like, and so just, this whole getting people to just recognize, and I think part of it is getting people to recognize there are real humans going to work every day so that you can have this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not just about digging up the earth just for giggles. It's real tangible stuff.
Well, and I'm trying not to get too soapboxy here.
But I'm up here already. I'm like actually like 6 feet tall right now.
That you're going, and now apparently I'm
sorry, your audience.
Bring it in a little bit. We do a bad job of talking about anything other than drill holes and meters and all of these things, right? And I got a note yesterday and said, hey, have you seen our latest press release? And I opened the press release, and I'm an investor, and I was like, thanks so much. What the hell does this mean? I am not a technical geologist. I have figured out how to read all kinds of these things. But if you have an investor that is giving you money and all you're doing is talking about meters per whatever, and this is what it's looking like most investors are investing because they have some emotional attraction or appeal to whatever it is. I'm an investor because I happen to believe in what this company is doing and all the rest of this stuff. And I think that they're pretty cool. But I was so disappointed to see what this really looked like, because it wasn't just going to me. It was going to everybody that has invested in this.
Yeah.
And so if we can't talk about something beyond the drill hole, something beyond the charts, the graphs, the maps, the whatever, we are failing. Right? We are only then talking to technical experts in our field rather than anybody else. Why do they want to join the industry? Your work matters. What you're doing
100%.
If you join as a reliability person, as somebody that's mining, as a haul truck driver, as a whatever you might be, an attorney, an HR person, your work then matriculates into something much, much bigger and goes much, much further than what you're actually doing. How often do we tell that story on our website, on our association pages, on anything that we're doing? We talk to one another, and this silo, this vacuum is hazardous for ourselves as well as everybody else who's working on consuming part of what we're doing. And so we have been our own worst enemy outside of consumers who are unwilling to recognize that they're asking for what they're asking for. So soapbox moment.
No, it's not. It's a very fair. I think sometimes, like you said, we don't even tell the story well within ourselves. When I worked at the iron operation, we didn't even do a good job of telling our workforce what you're doing and why it matters. And it's just such a missed opportunity. Our workers should be our best ambassadors.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't, coming from a former management team, I don't know that we even did the best job of telling our employees, you matter.
Yeah.
You matter to the US, you matter to the world. Your work matters. Yeah. How you do your work matters. And I hope, I would love for folks to, hear our conversation and just start thinking about that. Are you really sharing with your employees what your rocks grow up to be?
Right.
You should be able to go to a big city, like, thinking like New York City, and just go and say like, you're welcome.
They love that, Julie. But I mean, truly, if you're in the Iron Range and you're talking about producing X, you go to New York City, what are these buildings built with, right? And then you have glass, and you have metal, and you have cars, and you have cell phones, and you have all the things, and gas, and all the things, and they're coming from what we're doing. And, I have
deep pride in that.
Yeah, you took a part of that. And so whatever it is, but also to attract individuals into what we're doing, whether it be new talent or investors, we've been very short-sighted, and we look at STEM schools, we look at engineering schools, we look at how many mining schools we still have left that are producing these individuals, which is a statistic that I'm just not going to go into today. But, it's been shrinking, and it's unfortunate, but it is our own failure to not have this big vision and talk about how awesome and amazing and awe-striking it is to go from literally a tiny, tiny drill hole. And like, what are the chances that you go and have a geologist look at rocks and think, man, this is a really cool, whatever potential deposit. Let's go drill this. And then 20 plus years into the future, which is how long it takes, and sometimes more than that, we have this copper, or we have this iron, or we have this whatever, and this is what it does. But if we said that, and if we went outside of the traditional places to talk to people, to attract them to our industry in whatever capacity, we could really have some interesting, different thought. But we keep going back to the same pool, and we're running out of pool. So
we need a bigger pool. And I tell, one of the things I really try to get across to people is I'm like, quit writing off people as not supporting you. Because I was very against you. And now I run a trade association with over 80 members, and we support non-ferrous mining. Don't rule out people. People's minds can change, and they only change if you actually engage with them and you actually talk to them and you give them a reason to realize miners are just normal people. And we are people who care about the earth. And, most of us live in northern Minnesota because we really love natural resources. We choose to live in places with very few restaurants, and because we have everything we have. And we have to start going into spaces where people don't know us or don't by default like us. Because otherwise, how are they ever going to like us?
Like, we're a likable batch, if I do say so myself.
And we're amazing. My favorite thing about this job is I just love the people in mining so much. Like, I grimace a little at salt of the earth comments, but we are salt of the earth people. Like, we are people like with very tangible outcomes from what we do, and we are just a really great group of people, and we shouldn't be ashamed of what we do. When we build and power the world, we should be out there screaming that from the rooftops. And I just love that my job, I get to advocate for the future workforce of this region and the future people that are going to, build homes next to us and I'll run into at the grocery store. And that's my favorite thing, is I get to advocate for our future workforce while still kind of advocating for our current one.
That's right.
Because the people are amazing. I worked at a mine with 729 other people. A couple of them I couldn't handle, but the vast majority were just amazing people. And I love getting to support them.
I get to see you several times a year. And I feel lucky for that, right? And it's interesting because I travel a lot for work, and I get to see people that are interesting, that challenge me, that teach me new things, that are doing interesting work. And, I don't get to see lots of members of my family that often. But every time I run into you, wherever we are, I get a big hug and, download of what's going on. And it's not just you. It's so many individuals that I get to see and get to work with. And I take such pride in that, because even though we work hard, I love the ability to go and see all of you and get that moment, right? And figure out how we can talk about new things and challenge the status quo and talk to different people and bring them into the industry and share ideas and all the rest of the stuff that's so, so important. But the people are amazing. And having come into this unintentionally for the most part, every time I asked a question, somebody was more than happy to answer it. Every time I had a problem, somebody was more than happy to help me figure out how to solve it. If I needed to know somebody else, somebody would help me figure out how to connect the dots to that next person. And so I really feel such a huge responsibility to pay it back and to do the same thing. But like, my challenge is to talk not just to the people that are in our industry, but to talk to others. And so, I guess one of the things I often think about is, who do I get to talk to that's the most receptive to what we're doing, and why? Like, what is it about that person or the conversation that we have that like seems to accelerate it, right? Or that they come back to me and say, hey, remember we talked about whatever, and it's part of this or that or the other. I just try to think, how do I find more people like that will ask the questions, that then will be like, I had this wild conversation with this crazy person, Lindsey, that I know, and she told me X, Y, and Z. And and so like I think I go back to trying to figure out what is the character of individuals that like then go out and spread sort of some of this information beyond us. And I think that it's generally curiosity and wanting to understand how they can also do better. And it's not always that they have that moment where they realize that copper, or that we're contributing to fertilizers that are growing their food or medicine or whatever. But when I say that, they're like, what? And then they can go and tell that story. And so I think that curiosity, and then it comes to a consumerism phase. But I guess, have you recognized in any people, whether it be opponents or individuals that are more receptive, what do they look like to you that makes them successful and like want to go out and have and share these stories beyond us?
I think you're right. There's the curiosity, and there's humility, and there's the recognition that we're all just figuring out our way as we go through life.
Yeah.
And we're all every day trying to wake up and say, okay, what does today look like? What I see so many people, I'm just stuck on the word curiosity right now, because I think that's a big part of it, is just people recognizing I don't know everything. And there's more things I don't know than I do know.
Yeah.
And trying to find common ground between people, I think, is the other thing, because there's just a lot of, there's an organization in Minnesota that's really trying to find common ground between groups that don't have obvious links.
Sure.
And some of that is just love of people, love of planet.
Yeah.
And, so I see that with different conversations too, is when you start getting people to realize we all care about our community, we care about our state, our country, we care about our natural resources, but we also care about maintaining a certain quality of life.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about what that means.
Yeah. Well, I think this is as good a time as any for me to probably embarrass you. But Julie did a TED Talk. And here's the link, because I knew that you were going to do this, and then you delivered it, and then I was in my kitchen one evening watching it on my iPad as I was like mixing up spaghetti or whatever I was doing, and I'm like tearing up and like having a moment watching you deliver this speech. And it was so impactful for me. And I'm so pleased that we have avenues like TEDx Talks and other things that perhaps go beyond our tiny silo of mining. But I think that your message about truly, looking at this from an environmental protection standpoint and advocating for mining and responsible practices is one that people need to hear. And so, we're still in a silo here today. But if you guys haven't seen it, watch Julie's thing and tell me if it makes you cry, because it made me cry.
I don't know why it made you cry. Now I'm curious who else it's made cry.
Maybe I'm just a sucker, but I was tearing up the whole time. Maybe I was just, proud mama tears, but it made me cry. So I appreciate that you did that, and that we get to share that, and it goes beyond us today even. In recognition that we've already gone over our 30-minute time slot, which is so easy to do, I think we hit on the vast majority of things I promised to talk about today.
Sure.
So I think we hit advocacy. I think we hit community. I think we hit responsible mining practices. What else should we talk about before we come to a close?
Our challenges in Minnesota aren't ours uniquely. And I really want folks to keep thinking of ways to engage with people that don't love us, and don't be scared to have those conversations. And like I said, never write off somebody as not going to support us, because you just never know. And you're not going to, one conversation usually isn't enough. It's going to be multiple conversations, and they're going to remember how you treated them more than what you knew, right? It's not, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think we just start from recognizing that common things that we have with folks. And then I'll just do my plug that Northern Minnesota is amazing, and you should come visit us and spend your money here as tourists. And please follow our LinkedIn, follow our projects. We have, I can't do my work without our projects, right? So New Range Copper Nickel, Twin Metals Minnesota, Talon Metals, Pulsar Helium, North Star Manganese, and then Encampment Minerals is our exploration company. They are people that I'm just super proud to support, and super proud to support their projects, because I do, as an environmentalist, believe in what they do. As a community member, I believe in work they do there. So thank you everyone for listening in on today. And thank you so much, Lindsey, for having me. I can't wait to see you in a few weeks at
I know. I counted yesterday. It's 10 days, at least until I get there. So I don't know when you get there, but Julie and I will both be attending AEMA here coming up. And shameless plug.
I'm on a couple panels. Come check out my panels.
That's right. We both have panels. We will both be there. Come and hang out with us in Sparks, Nevada, December 2nd through 6th. I will also, ideally, I think this may be my last official live oratory. So putting that out there, Julie broke the mold, and now I have to go hide in a studio and do this with my future guests. No, but as wonderful as this forum is to have live conversations, I'm sort of just figuring this out, and I just may go and hide and have these conversations in private and do a better job of creating form and function, because I get so lost in the conversation at times because I'm having such great fun with our guests that sometimes I miss really awesome questions that I could ask. So the goal is to structure this in a way that it is relevant and exciting and interesting and impactful. So my goal is to do a better job of that. However, next month from AEMA, I will be chatting with Mark Compton, the executive director of AEMA, live from AEMA with a few other AEMA participants. And so that will be my first and last live event at an event. I don't know. So I'm very excited about it, and to see you, Julie, among other people. But that is my plug. And I guess from here, we can stick around for a few minutes, Julie, if you've got it, to answer any questions. We have a few here in the comments. Martha, I will share the link to Julie's talk in the chat on LinkedIn so that you can have it, and anyone else who's interesting. And then Dr. Hayden Mort, what did you say? The public needs some educational scaffolding to get our position without us coming across as preachy. Can we get them to our perspective without actually telling them how much they need mining?
I knew he was going to ask hard questions.
I know. I don't have enough caffeine. Sure we can.
I mean, that is kind of our challenge, right? I like to think I try to do that in my role.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, it's kind of, a lot of times I don't even talk about our final products, and I never talk about jobs, which is kind of funny when my household is a 2 mining income family. I should probably talk about jobs more. I usually start out just talking about natural resources, but that's, like I said, I live in the boonies, and that's just where we usually start conversations. But he's right. I mean, the scaffold, I like educational scaffolding. That's a really good way of saying that.
He always has good terms.
I
right?
know. That's why I got the program.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, if someone knows nothing about miner, I say I work in the mining industry, and they ask any kind of question, I generally start asking them more questions and try to figure out where they're at. Do they support it? Do they know anything about it? Where are we at? And kind of calibrate my response back. I don't know that that is always the best way, but that is sort of my default method at this point. Just to kind of get a baseline and then figure out how to have that conversation, and then really try to avoid getting preachy, because I know my kids don't listen to me when I'm preachy. And so
I'm excited. That's my problem.
I get really excited too. And yeah, I mean, that perhaps is a great thing, but yeah, it is a challenge. So what other questions? So yes, Talia, thank you for sharing the link so that Martha can see it. And I'm not sure that this actually conveys over to LinkedIn, so I will still share that on LinkedIn after the fact, because I think that the comments might be isolated onto StreamYard only. So I'll figure it out. And then less telling, more showing. Julie showed me the iron range this summer and it changed my perspective and I learned so much. I agree absolutely with that comment. My very first mine tour, I was not totally dead set on mining. I was just sort of dabbling, and I will never forget it. But I had I toured with a good friend of mine now, and he is a metallurgist and brilliant. And I got a whole chemistry lesson before I even got to go into and I'm sure I failed my chemistry lesson, but it was fascinating. I learned what SXCW was, and he told me that, you know, with some accents that were around, it was sexy W. And I always joke that mining needed to be more sexy, but you know, SXCW is probably the sexiest part of mining. So but it changed my perspective. I mean, the biggest trucks I have ever seen, I had to learn why they drove on the wrong side of the road and why we needed PPE, and how big rocks turned into smaller rocks. And resumes came to life for me after that. And what a hokey thing to say, but like, no, showing is so impactful. And I would argue that like we need some kind of social media, TikTok video ambassador that our mining companies welcome in a responsible way, that doesn't show the bad parts or the liabilities that they don't want out there, but like show what mining is, because it is fascinating and even so cool to watch. I mean, social medias are, you know, there's that. The hard thing is, how do you get people to real actual operating mines? Yeah. You know, I loved at my previous job, I was the one who gave the mine tours, and I probably give one still in my sleep. And getting people on site, and then they see the trucks roll by as we're in this bus, and they see the haul trucks. You know, we had 240-ton haul trucks, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" Yeah. And so getting them there is such a big thing. But you know, we have a Mind View with big new center coming up that has explaining what everything is that they can see at the Mind View. You know, getting people there is so critical to just see it. I worry a little bit with social media because we end up in echo chambers, right? We end up in your little bubble, and unless you link to one another, breaking your algorithm is tough to do. I mean, I think it's important, and we've looked at going on to TikTok, just because I think I see a lot of our opponents' stuff on there, and I'm like, well, we need to be on there more, and there are some folks on there, but there's just something to be said for seeing the mine and just, yeah, to the companies that do mine tours, thank you so much, because I know it's, as an former environmental manager, I know that there's just a little bit of stress sometimes with that, but it's just so important to get people out. It is really important. And Chris said, those of us who've worked in the legacy side of the industry have much to say about how companies are committed to dealing with these issues as much as improving what we do to minimize future legacy issues. We have stories to tell too. And I absolutely agree with that, right? And mining is so siloed even within mining, right? Oh, yeah. So we compartmentalize all of these individuals, but having these big, broad discussions and sharing the stories, I think has been one of the most impactful things I have seen, because they convey really well. And I think I'm glad Kristen brought that up about legacy, because we have to own it. And yes, I don't want to take blame for something other generations did, but I think it's important to
to own that and say, this is what happened pre-Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and the US. And I've worked on legacy sites that were very expensive to clean up. And so I would tell our current employees, this is why I'm such a jerk about what we do with barrels. This is why I'm such a jerk on what we do about XYZ, because this is costing us millions of dollars to clean up what they did in 1964.
Yeah.
And so it's important to talk about that legacy and to say, we have a whole new generation of people that aren't cool with how we used to do stuff. There's a reason there's new rules and regulations. And let's just face it. Let's just own it. It happened, it's done. And we are better industry because we have changed.
Absolutely. Well, literally in my backyard, there is an old quarry.
Oh,
and yeah. And there's this, when I moved to Colorado Springs years and years ago, I looked at the side of the mountain and I was like, that was a mine. I wonder what kind of mine it was. So I look it up and I'm like, oh, it was a quarry. And
cool.
they used it for road materials as they were like building out the area that I live in, but they didn't fix it. And then this past spring, my mom says, hey, I read this article in the whatever, and here it is. And they're gonna build it into like a dog park, a mountain biking range, all this stuff, right? Well, it's literally in my backyard. Like I could walk to it in 5 minutes. And so I see all these trucks moving around, and like this is my I just go and watch. But they have started overhauling this entire place. Well, of course, it's going to cost more money and take more time and do all of this stuff. But eventually, the scar, as Colorado Springs people call it, will turn into a really cool recreational area. And you know, if that isn't showing that we can take something that was formerly the scar and turn it into something that can be used and is perhaps even better than it was before in this awesome park where kids and families can go and play. That might not be the end goal always, but this is taking something that was not done probably correctly and turning it into something that we're all really going to enjoy at some point. So, it's a great thing. Like, how can we get a field trip to this? Like, all I want to do is take my kids to a field trip, but it's not.
I mean, that's fair. Take a field trip to our mountain bike parks in Minnesota. So we have the Cuyuna Mountain Bike Park and we have the Redhead Mountain Bike Park. But they're both former mining areas that have been turned into mountain bike parks, and they're amazing. And mining, there's a book called Mindscapes, written by a gentleman from up here who he's, focuses on mining is a transition land use. We had the land before, we have the land after. Mining is that transition. We can create a good world from where we mine, and trying to rethink it. It's not a scar. It is a place where we had a product that we pulled out of the earth that was used, and now we use this earth for a new purpose.
Yep.
And it's just getting people to understand that we're a part of this, and this is what humans do: is we use resources. We don't have to do it in a bad way. We can do it in a good way. And now I want to see the quarry that's near you, because you're right. We can rethink what we do with land when we're done.
Yeah. Well, when you're here for SME, I'll take you on a tour. I've got to find a person that'll take me on a tour. But if I tell them that you're coming, they'll probably let us in.
This crazy woman from northern Minnesota.
She's got some tips and tricks. She's already got 2 of these in her backyard.
They're amazing. They are incredible. So
anyway, we could go on and on, as you guys can see.
Thank you.
No, this is amazing. This is what we're here
for. My camera.
So Julie, thank you. And I am so happy to have you here, and I'm so excited that I get to see you very, very shortly. So be well. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you all for joining us. If there are additional questions, we will answer them through LinkedIn. And if you guys have any tips, tricks, ideas, or how we can do things better, Julie and I are very receptive, and we would love to hear. So enjoy the day. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye. All